We go now to Deputy Catherine Murphy.
Thank you. Taoiseach, I've never claimed that people on this side of the House have a monopoly on empathy, and I'm sure you're getting the same kind of queries from people struggling to cope with the cost of living crisis at your constituency offices I'm getting at mine in Kildare. It's for that reason that I'm really struggling to understand why you're refusing to alleviate the pressure on people at this point. All we've gotten for weeks now from the government is platitudes, but tea and sympathy won't pay people's bills. And yesterday you said something that I found really extraordinary. You ruled out any measures being introduced because the budget, before the budget in October, and said that would give relief to people in terms of the pressures that they're currently facing. It would give relief to people in terms of the pressures that they're currently facing. That's actually a quote, Taoiseach. I took it from the written word.
It out, is it, that we could relieve? Sure, of course I didn't.
I'm just quoting back to you what I took from a quote. Taoiseach, people are worried about how they're going to heat their homes, pay their rent or mortgage, and put food on the table. And 4 months feels like a lifetime. And all the indications are, Taoiseach, and I think we all know it, all the indications are that this is going to worsen. A number of kites have been flown in relation to childcare, taxation and social welfare increases, but essentially, how can people get relief from something they don't know what's going to come in the budget, for example? And increasingly we're hearing people talking about, worrying about already being in debt. We know that energy bills will soar by up to $2,000 this year, while fuel costs will skyrocket by an additional $1,500. We know that there's a staggering 30% of people in fuel poverty spending more than 10% of their income on energy. We also know that people on low to middle incomes are the ones suffering most. And we know that core social welfare rates, like pensions, were only increased by €5 over the last 3 years. Those people can't hang on, Taoiseach. They're not surviving at the moment. And, the promise is it'll be something more than a fiver in this year's budget. We've proposed an emergency budget. We think that there should be a €10 increase in social welfare rates, core social welfare rates. We think that €300 should be put back into people's pockets, earning up to 50,000 with a refundable tax credit, and the creation of a €100 million hardship fund. There's no doubt that there are targeted measures such as the one of doubling social welfare is the kind of thing that could make, or a double payment could make a sizable difference. And I think we in this House wouldn't mind sitting an extra week if there was another mini budget or emergency budget brought in. Can I ask you, Taoiseach, is it intended to do anything at all before the budget? Are you, for example, intending to extend the excise changes that are due to expire on the 31st of August into October?
Please.
Extended.
Taoiseach.
They've been extended to budget day already, the excise duty. So, but what I want to say, Deputy, is this, that we fully accept the pressures that are on people. And we have brought in now since October 2.4, if you include the budget, 2.4 billion worth of measures, targeted in many respects in terms of healthcare costs, education costs, fuel costs, and transport costs in terms of reducing public transport. And when people talk of a mini budget, now Deputy MacDonald called for an emergency budget, I'm not so sure you're really talking about an emergency budget. I think you're just talking about an emergency expenditure programme. If we're honest, the budget has pluses and minuses, the budget has revenue generation. I won't go into the detail of that, but in essence, it seems to me that every month since this crisis, and it's a very serious crisis, and I can understand why, but every month people want $1 billion to be spent, if we're honest about it. I mean, no sooner had we announced the last $1 billion and a bit that the demand was for more the following month. And I have no doubt that if something was announced next week, before a month was out, people would be looking for another package. Deputies would be, and parties would be. That's the nature of it. I think we all agree on one thing, that the people are under enormous pressure because of what's happening globally and within Europe. And you're right in one thing when you said it could get worse, and I think it will get worse. And that's why we need to make sure that what we do is well thought through, doesn't add unnecessarily to inflation or to the inflationary cycle, is targeted. I agree with you that it should be targeted. And I think the ESRI report is useful, very useful in that respect. And also, I think it should be sustainable over a longer period of time. That as soon as we do the budget, that we don't have to do something the following month and the following month again, if we can avoid that, because we need to create stability, we need to underpin our jobs, we need to underpin the other positive sides of Irish productivity and manufacturing. That's clearly evident at the moment. And a lot of that depends on the global situation too, which we're worried about, that markets in other parts of Europe are under pressure. We can see that now from reports and predictions coming in. The biggest fear is stagflation for a prolonged period of time. We have to be, because I think one of the biggest barriers against poverty is getting a job, if you can get work. Thankfully in this country, because of the way we managed the economy for the last 2 years, the way we supported jobs and enterprises through the pandemic, we enabled many of them to come back much more quickly than might have been anticipated, and many of them to survive. With the result is that we have record levels of employment. Now that's a strength going into the end of the year. We will have revenue coming in also, but again, towards the tail end of the year, there's a lot of uncertainty. Because of that uncertainty, we equally need to be cautious and make sure that we get it right. But be in no doubt that we want to alleviate the pressures. We want to do it in a comprehensive way and in a way that will affect average people in a good way for a more sustained period of time.
Deputy Murphy.
Taoiseach, I mean, it would be perfectly possible, for example, to introduce a windfall tax on energy companies. We know that there's a very sizable amount of additional tax being taken because of inflation in terms of energy, but also the inflationary impact on goods and services. So there is an income coming in to government. When you talk about the expenditure, there is an income as well, and quite a sizable additional income. And like you talk about Putin and the discontent. The discontent will be sowed by not responding as well domestically, and like I think he must be delighted with the kind of discontent that he's sowing outside of Ukraine, the appalling situation in Ukraine. I think it's really important that we don't allow him to do that. And that's why this kind of political vacuum is important that we don't allow happen. And that's why I think these measures at this point where people are saying, look, they're not managing now. It's not just in your constituency office, people are stopping you on the street. I'm sure you're getting that as well. People are really worried. Those of us who remember inflation of 20% and more, many of them are pensioners now who are terrified of the winter.
Thank you.
I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying. People are terrified of the winter. We want to make sure that we have a comprehensive package that protects people throughout the winter. Throughout the winter now. And beyond the winter, we want to protect people as best we can. And we have to do it taking on board a whole range of issues. I mean, right now, we have to really settle our expenditure levels in every government department. Why? Because we need to protect education, we need to protect health, housing, social protection. I mean, those departments have measures that are important in terms of cost of living. Like, we have to do this in a proper evidence-based way. And not just saying, here's $1 billion in July, here's $1 billion in August. I mean, that won't work. And I don't think it will be optimal or effective for people on the ground either. And the SRI have pointed out that some measures that were asked for in the House were not ideal or optimal, and that perhaps we could target more. That's what the SRI have suggested. And so I'm open to suggestions in terms of the type of measures and so on that deputies think we should concentrate on.
Thank you.
But what's very important that the budget will set expenditure levels for 12 months. Across all the various government departments.
Time is up now,
that
please.
work is underway between the Minister for Public, just pay issues, just tax issues. And then there's the package to alleviate pressures on people as well.